recognize a few faces from last time. I grew up in New Zealand and I ended up in London for 5 years in the Margie Thatcher years. That was fun. And then I went back to Australia. So this is now sort of around the early 80s. And I started a natural health centre. And back in those days, they didn't really exist. So I was one of the first ones in Sydney, Australia. And we started to put together, like a holistic approach. We had a chiropractor, and, people doing massage and acupuncture, etc. So my personal background to begin with was acupuncture. And so, but I decided earlier on in my career not so much to do acupuncture because it gets very, very kind of, you're always patching people up, right? And they're not really, you don't get a chance to educate them about how they could heal that themselves, right? Which is quite involved. So I actually built a cooking school in this health centre, the Glebe Healing Centre, for those who know Sydney. It was on Glebe Point Road. And we started to really, really focus on food as medicine from a perspective of the Taoist approach to medicine. So we were using yin and yang and 5 elements, and for those who might know it, the 3 treasures. This is the sort of the fundamental approach from Chinese medicine that we use in all of those modalities: feng shui, qigong, meditation, astrology, cosmology. There's this core philosophical dynamics that we use for everything. So we started to apply that to food, of course. And, we were part of the emerging and pretty much at that pioneer stage of like whole foods coming back into our culture. And some of us starting to think about, well, what were our ancestors eating like 100 years ago? Because, really since the Second World War, our food patterns have drastically changed, like big time. And as you know, there's now like tens of thousands of chemicals in our food chain. And also we kind of lost the plot. We lost the wisdom of our ancestors. We weren't listening to grandma anymore, right? And that kind of thing, right? So I started to put that together, and I was doing a lot of counseling for people, because there was a lot of, like the macrobiotic movement had started to make things like food as medicine very popular again. So people were, attracted to it from cancer and HIV and so forth. This is back in the 80s, right? And what I noticed was that people really, really needed training in all the new ingredients that I was introducing them to. For instance, I was introducing them to seaweed, and it's incredibly healing. We'll look at that tonight. But that's why I built the cooking school. And for instance, my clients now, they'll have a couple of hours with me, but then they'll come for like a 6-week course in the evening, and we'll show them how to put all of those ideas together. Otherwise, all of that information would often just go in one ear and out the other, which actually quite often happens when you're introducing people to new ideas around food, because food is the biggest habit that a human being has got. It's like totally ingrained from us, right from the patterns of the household that we grew up in. And then later on, all the propaganda and all the advertising and, and so forth. So I got into this whole thing of taking people on a journey with the cooking school. And then that just became formalized after 1 year into the Academy of Healing Nutrition. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to cover 3 areas. Obviously, each area is, it's a year course, each area. So I'm going to do the best I can for you tonight. It's quite a lot of material to cover. So I'm very open to questions at any stage of the game here, folks. And also later on, we'll open it up to questions. So we're going to start with the longevity diet, and the influences that I have First of all, this whole thing of cultures of longevity. If you really, really want the information about the cultures of longevity, you have to go back to what was written in the 1920s and the 1930s. Not the modern writers who came up with the blue zone scenario, where they had all of these other agendas going on, like the low-fat diet, right, which is a subject for tonight as well. If you go back to the 1920s and 1930s, particularly with the writings of Weston A. Price, and he was this incredible individual. He realized that the health of America was already sort of going downhill, and he was a dentist, and he was totally obsessed with dental health. So him and his wife, every year for a good 15 years, and remember this is before the Second World War, so traveling in those days was pretty tough. You know, they would get on a ship from New York and then catch a donkey up the hill, right? And so they would disappear for like 4 to 5 months of the year. They ended up going to about 15 cultures of longevity. Now tonight, we're going to sort of skip over that. I'd love to just spend the whole night with his material because it's absolutely fantastic, right? He went to villages in Switzerland, right, where they had their traditional diet, not contaminated by modern diet and sugar and everything. And this village, they never got tuberculosis because other parts, because they were quite isolated from other parts of Switzerland, and it wasn't because they were that isolated that, you know, that there were still people kind of coming in and trading, but none of the sort of modern foods that the other Swiss people were now eating was in this village, right? And the village had about 600, 700 people, right? So he lives with these people, he studies with them, and he documents it really, really well. So he went to the Maori people in New Zealand, he went to some Indian tribes in northern Canada. Of course, he went to 3 parts of the Mediterranean. When people talk about the Mediterranean diet, it's actually quite a diverse diet there. I don't think he came to England from memory, but he did talk about the French diet and so forth. So that book is called Nutrition and Degenerative Disease. And these cultures of longevity had no degenerative disease, they had no cancer, they had no heart disease, and they had fabulous teeth. Remember, and he was absolutely obsessed with their teeth. And these people, remember, didn't have toothpaste and toothbrushes and so forth. And he documented it really, really well. Oh no, he came to Scotland, that's right, because it's a famous chapter in his book where he often does people still eating their ancestral diet and then people eating the modern diet. And he had all these Scottish lads with all of their teeth missing because the Scottish had a high consumption of simple sugar by that stage, right? So he documented this very well. So I'm going like, this is like nearly 40 years ago, I'm going like, wow, that's the proof in the pudding, right? All we need to do is kind of study what they were eating and then create the guidelines and the principles and the ingredients and put it into our modern life. You know, because I don't live in a village in Switzerland and I'm not from Okinawa, which was another, in fact, as you know, the Okinawans, they're the most successful out of the cultures of longevity. So in a way, all you've got to do is like, you know, what are they eating? And examine that and then put it into our modern lifestyle. Right? So I'm going to be touching on that quite a bit tonight. And then the other thing is, what I'm not going to be able to cover much tonight is all the energetics. So the longevity diet provided all of the nutrition from almost like from a Western perspective, right? What were they eating, the ingredients, but then I combined that with yin and yang and warming and cooling and eating with the seasons and eating with your body type, your doshas, and are you a hot type or are you a cool type? And I think that's very, very important because Western people, when it comes to food, they primarily just think of where am I going to get my vitamin C from and, where do I get my B vitamins from? We're very, very left brain. We sort of break food down into its small little components. Whereas in Taoist Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic thinking, and our esoteric knowledge from our Western background, which we've forgotten big time, they looked at things energetically, right? So I don't have much of a chance to do that tonight, but just to tell you that that's pretty much what the training is about. So we better move on. So we choose from all of the food groups. So what I noticed from studying cultures of longevity, where they had the success, it wasn't veganism, it wasn't vegetarianism, right? That came later in our history, as you know, and we can talk about that, how the history of that. But essentially, we look at all of the food groups and we look at the quality of that food, right? So tonight I will be talking about dairy food, right? But we don't use modern dairy food in our work. We use the traditional dairy food that we had all around Europe for thousands of years that is very, very healing if you use the raw milk, the raw cheese, etc. So we're going to touch on that tonight as well. But the theme is we are looking at all of the food groups. So there's no dogma. Okay, so you've heard the term nutrient-dense foods, very, very important. So good quality, obviously, vegetables and beans and nuts. So it's very, very important when it comes to things like grains. So a lot of people get a lot of trouble with grain eating because they've lost the wisdom of how to prepare the grains, right? So, and by the way, grains were with all of the cultures of longevity. So don't believe what the paleo people were telling you about that one, right? If you look at the anthropology of it all and the writings, they were pretty much with all the cultures of longevity in one form or another. So it's definitely part of our ancestral eating. What we have forgotten is how to soak them and sprout them and make proper sourdough bread, and how to make even drinks from them, etc. So that's really the trick about eating grains, right? Which is very, very important, I think, to keep, right? So that's what we do in the academy, is we show people how to do all of that and how to make interesting dishes from all of that, right? So we use obviously a lot of fresh vegetables, mostly cooked, right? And also raw. We can vary that with your body type. Some people just don't need cooling foods like raw foods because of the condition. In Chinese medicine, we would call that they're too cold. They got cold hands and cold feet, etc. The hot types can have some more raw food, but primarily we do like the art of cooking. We like to get that yang energy in there because it sort of we take that yang energy on through fire, right? And it makes the food more digestible. And when you look at cultures of longevity, they all cook their vegetables, right? Right. So mainly it's various vegetables cooked, but we also incorporate raw food. Right? And that could vary, of course, in the yang seasons of spring and summer when you crave more lighter food, more raw food. But then in the yin seasons of autumn and winter, you definitely need more warming food, right? We really celebrate the sea vegetables. In my opinion, it's one of the great secrets of longevity. It's one of the great secrets of your healing. It's one of the secrets. Yeah, you have a question there.
Yeah, can I just ask a quick question? With the sea vegetables, because you can get them in like powder form, can't you? You can take them like that.
Yeah.
Don't
start with the powder form. Don't start with the powder form.
No, okay.
Start with the real thing.
Yeah.
You know. Start with the real sea vegetables and learn how to cook them. You can always use the powder forms later on, and smoothies and drinks and elixirs if you're going to use them. But basically start with like kombu, put it into when you're cooking beans. We always put kombu in when you make your broths and your bone broths, which I'll be talking about tonight. Use your wakame in salads and soups, so that's a good place to start. Master that first, and then you can broaden out too. It's going to cost more too when you buy the powders. Anything that's been touched by a human being is always going to cost you more. So we've got this principle, as much as possible, just get the raw ingredients. It's going to be good for your budget, plus then you're going to apply the alchemy of making that interesting, making it digestible, right? And you're always after that whole food as well, right? Because it's so, like nature is this wonderful matrix of all of the, the enzymes and the minerals, etc., that we take that energy on. That technically is the definition of holistic medicine, is to take as much from nature in its whole form. So yes, anyway, we celebrate sea vegetables, and your ancestors here used sea vegetables, they traded in them. There's young people now in Scotland starting new industries. There's sea vegetables you can get from Australia, and of course these wonderful sea vegetables you can get from Japan in your health food store. So all of this now is very, very available. The convenience, you'll find them, right? But very, very important, guys, because modern people are incredibly demineralized. And that's come about, as you know, from our soils now being very, very demineralized. And it's also come about from all of the, previous dietary tendencies that you had, right? Creating a very acid condition, and that's demineralized you. So generally speaking, 99.999% of the population is needing the 90 macro and micro minerals, again, for everything to function. So this is a minerally rich kind of peasant-like diet, right? And the way you can start to get that very, very simply back into your body so your immune system can start to function and all these other things can function is just have sea veg twice a week. It's as simple as that. But start to integrate it. In Chinese medicine, like on another level, the sea vegetables are part of the water element, for those who are familiar with Chinese medicine, and it's the kidneys and bladder and the reproductive energies. So we use sea vegetables quite a bit for reproductive problems, infertility, low libido, all sorts of things, right? The Chinese medicine, we have the organ groups, and those organ groups relate to physical aspects, associations in the body. They relate to emotional aspects and psychological aspects. So this being the Conscious Cafe, even though we're talking about all these physical, tangible things, why people do this is to develop their consciousness. That's the fundamental thing. And to actually get, their emotions and their body and their mind as one. So that's primarily why we are doing this, just to let you know, because we often skip the beat about how this is about your conscious development ultimately. So anyway, sea vegetables, really, really important. Of course, we love using all of the herbs and spices, right? We don't restrict ourselves at all. We use all of them. To make those dishes interesting, we love getting the cumin in there and the coriander, we love it all because it's antibacterial, antiviral, and it makes foods really, really interesting, right? And of course, this is not a low salt diet. We had wars over salt historically, right? So you guys can get hold of the Celtic salt, any naturally produced salt is very, very important. And quite frankly, it's nice to have 5 or 6 different types of salt in your kitchen. So intuitively you can go, oh no, I use the Himalayan salt with this dish, or no, I use the darker salt for this dish. Or even seasonally, you can use the lighter ones in summertime and the more heavier ones in winter. We use obviously a lot of other seasoning condiments that are alkalizing and minerally rich, like the shoyu and tamari that you're probably familiar with, that was introduced by the macrobiotic community. This is not a macrobiotic course tonight, but I do celebrate that generation of macrobiotic pioneers, because they're the ones that created this whole mushroom of consciousness from the 1960s onwards. Right? They were the ones who sort of started the whole movement with food as medicine and the holistic and organic farming. It was pretty much done by the Rudolf Steiner movement and the macrobiotic movement back in the 60s. Okay, we love fermented foods, and there's a whole list here. Notice that we've got, unlike a lot of other people that will really put dairy foods down, you'll notice that we've got raw cheese, raw milk, and we use the traditional foods like from Eastern Europe, like kefir and natural yogurts, etc. These are wonderful healing foods. They have, when you get to know yin and yang a little bit, some foods, some of the fermented foods are just very good for like dry conditions, so very good for the complexion and the skin, etc. But all in all, always good for the microbiome, which you've all heard about now, right? We've been teaching about how to look after your microbiome for 40 years. It's not new to us, but it is becoming a modern conversation, thank God. And of course, a range of natural beverages that you can get your hands on now. Some of them are very, very convenient. We're using things like apple cider, and there's other vinegars that we do use.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure can.
If you have acid reflux, can you still have apple cider vinegar?
Well, it might be a little tricky for you, right? But you just try a little small amount with warm water and try it, right? But obviously you might have, you should really just start to think about maybe having a miso soup first, right? Because that's going to get the heat and the acid out of your stomach, because the miso is very alkalizing and has a lovely descending, calming sort of energy. So do that for a couple of weeks and then try your apple cider make sure it's warm and just use a small amount. It is good for you, but if you feel that your stomach can't handle it, then back off from it and do some of these suggestions that I've got tonight, put that into action, and then you'll be able to come back that to real easy. The stomach has a good, it can heal itself very, very quickly. Yeah.
Sorry, can I just ask?
Yep.
Has anyone got a spare pen? I've got mine.
So this is just some pictures that we get our students to make, a whole variety of fermented food. Very, very important. And we also get into things like the elixirs and using the superfoods. And our students start to understand things like the blood building foods that are, and the qi forming foods, and the Jing forming foods, J-I-N-G. So any conversation around longevity, you guys have to start to study Jing from a Taoist medicine perspective, because that's our approach to the constitutional energy that we inherited from father and mother, good old planet Earth and the cosmos. All of that is in our constitution. Right? And in Taoist thinking, the whole idea of longevity is to look after your Jing, or your constitutional energy. And quite frankly, natural medicine is all about, in the bigger picture, about just looking after your constitution. So if you look after your constitution, you've got a long, healthy life. So there are some foods that are very, very good for just the Jing energy of your body. And I'll touch on that tonight. Right? But it's a concept that you should write down, Google it, study it. If you want to live to over 120, you have to get that. For instance, at the end of today, there's some references, and we're going to do some biohacking at the end of tonight. And we're going to come from a Western perspective and a Chinese medicine perspective. And I'm going to give you a lot of take-home things to do. Right? So that one in the corner there, that's called Rehmannia, R-E-H-M-A-N-N-I-A. Readily available from Chinatown. You can go into Chinatown in London, probably, the closest Chinatown, or over the internet. And it's like a black, it's already, the herb is already prepared. You throw it into some water, put some red dates in, a touch of vanilla, and you've got a coffee-like flavour. It's really, really delicious. And now you're starting to build up your kidney yin. And so in the longevity arts, you have to understand how important the kidney yin is. So that gene that I told you about in Chinese medicine, that's housed in the kidneys. Right? And people often get kidney qi problems, and that shows up all signs and symptoms that we use in diagnosis in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. The point I'm making here is that yin is the deep essence, it's the sap, right, of your constitution. And you have to replenish it. So there's some simple herbs that replenish that, and that's Romania is the number one longevity herb that we use in Chinese medicine. So it's easy as anything, guys. Romania, you buy it, you make a coffee out of it, you drink it. It's not caffeine or anything, but it's coffee-like. You have a question?
What's the spelling, please?
Yeah, R-E-H.
Yeah.
M-A-N-N-I-A, Romania. And notice you can always pick up the red dates, and that's a blood builder. You have to make it interesting, like make it a little sweet, right? It's not a overly bitter herb. It's actually quite tasty. Yeah.
Roger, what about one of those discs? What about using powdered Romania? Okay.
That's fine if that's all you've got.
Is it okay to have that with like your breakfast, just stirred in with powder?
No, I'd make it make a tea out of it. Yeah. The powdered one you're usually adding warm water and you know, it's an instant one.
Okay.
But the best idea is not to start with powders. Start with just the real raw herb.
Okay.
Yeah.
What would you use as sweet for sweetening?
Good question. You know those red dates, they sweeten it up, right? We don't mind using raw honey, right? And you know, there's some other sweeteners that we use, but you could also put some, if you like, some rice malt or barley malt in that, if you want. But that, all you really generally are using is those red dates. They sweeten up quite nicely. We have another sweetener that you might know it now because it's in the supermarket, and it's monk fruit, M-O-N-K. Well, that's actually been around for 7,000 years, and it's Lohan Gua, and we use that as a lung tonic. The lungs have a tendency to get deficient and dry, and that's where a lot of lung respiratory problems come from. So it's a major lung tonic, but it's sweet, and it doesn't spike your blood sugars, like zero. Right?
I think it's still very hard to get here in the UK.
It might do, and the other thing is in the supermarket that it's not 100% monk. It's got some others, yeah, but that's okay. That's better than sugar, because that's just going to spike your blood sugars. And whenever you spike your blood sugars, which is a conversation for tonight, if you want to live a long, healthy life, you have to sort of start to organise your life so that you're not spiking your blood sugars so much, right? Obviously, simple, refined foods do that. Sugar does that. Alcohol without having something to eat does that, etc. Right? Spiking your blood sugars just sets off a whole chain of, free radicals happening. The insulin is like too much insulin running through the body. It's nasty, and it starts to break down the cell membranes and all sorts of havoc. And that's, of course, diabetic condition, etc. And that is a short life. Right? So in biohacking, you're always after those low GI ingredients. And when we have the conversation about healthy fats, that's going to be your big secret about also maintaining those blood sugar levels and not getting them spiked by sneaking those fats in there. In answer to your question, start off with the red dates. If it's not sweet enough for you, put some raw honey in it. Don't cook with the raw honey, yeah? Put it in at the end. You've come across the goji berries, yeah? Everybody knows goji berries now. Major blood builder. You see, up the top there, you guys would go, ooh, looks pretty serious. From like people who have done the training now, Gina, they'll be looking at that and going, oh yes, that's what I want. Because anything that is kind of dark is like black beans, miso, seaweed. These are all strong Jing foods, right? The Romania is very black. It's actually very, very pleasant, but it's got a couple of herbs in there. But these are some of the medicinal broths that we make. Very easy to do. Guys, you only need to master 5 or 6 herbs and you'll live a long, healthy life. And you make them into your soups and your broths and technically your porridges and some teas. That's all you need. You don't have to learn 360 herbs that I learnt, right, when you're making a herbal formula. In the culinary arts, how to put these herbs into cook, you only need to start to think about 5. And tonight you've already got kind of 2 so far, yeah? Romania and goji berries, right? Anyway, and red dates, major tonic,
Roger,
easy to use.
when you use the term blood builder, what does that mean?
It really does, yeah. So in the West we have a very simplistic notion of blood, like anemia. Right? In Chinese medicine, when we eat, we build up our blood, obviously. So it is the deep, when we say blood, it's the deep yin, it's the deep nurturing energy that we get from our food and our air. And that we need to transform that in food into blood, and that's your digestive system. And technically that is, in Chinese medicine, that's the spleen or the earth energy. So people do a lot of damage to their solar plexus. There's the digestive fire is weak, and then they can't digest food very well. They become very sensitive to foods. They can easily put on what's called sort of damp and water retention from that digestive energy not working. So ultimately, in answer to your question, we're building up the deep yin of the body, right? That's, when I say building blood, that's what it is. It's the nurturative energy of what every cell in your body needs. So we have a notion called, a condition called blood deficiency. So imagine if you skipped a couple of meals, you start to feel lightheaded, don't you? You're now blood deficient. That yinness is not there, which is actually anchoring you to the earth. You have a bowl of soup and you feel better, don't you? You go, oh, I can concentrate again. You've now just built up your blood. Right? Some people have blood deficiency sort of clinically though. It's sort of gone deep into the body, so that nurturing energy is not there, so they start to get dry symptoms. They'll get cracks in their tongue, etc., etc. There's a lot of symptoms associated with blood deficiency. So that whole digestive energy is just very, very important to work on. Essentially, the Academy Healing Nutrition, our students are just working on their digestive energy for the whole year. You get that one working well, then the other organ groups are now nourished with blood and qi and the nutrients that they need. Let's keep going, because time is of the essence tonight. So we love using bone broths, right? I've been pushing that for 40 years, and it's just great to start to see it's starting to become kind of popular. People are starting to write books about it now. Some of the sort of people on the blogs, around the internet, they're suddenly going, oh yes, bone broths are really good, try it, right? So I would suggest that you start doing this in your own kitchen, easy to do. Now, what this is about is that in Chinese medicine, not only is there the sort of nutrition that's in the bones, all the minerals and the amino acids and the collagen and the etc. You've probably read about that, but it's also where the gene is. So again, if in Chinese medicine, if you eat a bone energy, it's good for your bones. And it's a way of driving that nutrition into your bones. So if you want to keep your bones very strong, start creating bone broths. If you want to smooth the action of the digestive system, start having bone broths. If you want to get rid of your leaky gut scenario, which modern foods has just done so much damage to the digestive tract, start having bone broths. If you want to get rid of dry symptoms like dry mouth, dry hair, dry nails, etc., start having bone broths, because it starts to lubricate, moisten, and bring that yin energy back into the body that we all need. The longest living people out of the longest living people were the Okinawan tribe. So let's study them for 10 seconds. What did they do? Bone broth. It was a fishing village. So the woman would get the fish. Obviously they would fillet it, they would eat the fish, but they'll keep the bones. The villagers had a big cauldron, so all the bones went in there. They put the kombu seaweed in there, and all the vegetable scraps, and that was just like, like a lot of villages, the stock pot, just like in a really good French kitchen, the stock pot is there, right? So they were eating a fish bone broth, and then that went into all their vegetable preparations. It went into their congee, which is the rice broken down so it's more digestible. It went into their miso soup. It went into their vegetable dish, just like we do, the main people who do that is in French cooking, right? And that's an incredible art. So I would encourage you to start making bone broths in your kitchen. Once a week, get a big pot, select your bones, throw some kombu in, scraps, brew it for 24 hours, and then you can keep that, say, in some containers for that week, but then the other half, freeze it. So it's convenient. So you freeze it into small packets, and then when you've run out for that week's supply, it does keep very well, by the way, but generally people like to keep it in the fridge. And then when you run out of that, you can start using the frozen ones. So now you're up to, 2.5 weeks, and you have to do it again. So when you do make a stock, make enough for 2 to 3 months, up to 2 to 3 weeks, or a month's worth, up to you, And then then you can actually have a nice warming drink instead of black tea, instead of acid-forming coffee. Get the idea? It's just something that you can drink throughout the day. Right? Believe me, you can get results in your stomach reflux condition within 24 hours, quite frankly. Then other people, after 1 or 2 weeks of having maybe 2 or 3 cups a day of bone broth, it's like a miracle. I can go to the toilet, I don't feel, uncomfortable, I'm not getting bloating, my intestinal cramps are going, etc., etc. Get the idea? It's just one warming, building, soothing, buffering, etc. All traditional people used bone broths. Okay, so all traditional people used animal proteins, right? And they all use their natural fats from those animals. Right? So, and that was clearly written about at the turn of the century. Right? And if you look at any traditional cookbook, I've got this lovely English cookbook from the 1920s. It's this thick, and of course everybody used various forms of seafood and animals, and that was across the board with all of the cultures of longevity. Now, also within that, their preference, the most nutrient-dense food on the planet is organ meat, right? Which grandma and grandpa used to use, right? But then we've now got 1 or 2 generations where we go, ooh, organ meat, right? That psychologically people will go, ooh. Well, not everybody, not me, not our students, but the point I'm making, we kind of lost that whole culinary art, and we went to muscle meat, right? Now, traditional people, like you take the Aboriginal when they went hunting, and there's plenty of kangaroos to hunt, they didn't bother with the muscle, they only ate the organs. Native Americans, when they went hunting for buffalo, they didn't eat the muscle, they only ate the organs, right? It's incredibly nutrient dense. The second most nutrient dense food on the planet is sprouts. Can you believe it? So there's a nice little polarity for you. Good for the vegetarians. So, and that's a major blood builder. So I would highly recommend during pregnancy that people start to use these traditional foods again, because it creates a very strong constitution, and it drives, when you start to use these traditional foods, you start to drive in the fat soluble vitamins, which are A, D, and E, and K, right? And that's what our ancestors used. That's why then. Have you noticed when you look at pictures of granddad and grandma from the 1920s, have you noticed their bone structure is different to modern people? Have you noticed that their ears are bigger than modern people? Have you noticed? Modern, yeah, will do that. Because they were eating that, and they had a much stronger bone structure. Check it out. It's worth looking into. We don't have time to study it too much tonight. I'm just throwing that one at you. Okay, so very, very important to get your fats right. So we do, you know, we, in a nutshell, we don't use the vegetable oils, which, so there's some very, very interesting politics around all of that. I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of it very, very quickly. It sort of goes like this. At the turn of the century, they had a lot of seeds to sell because we had fossil fuels now with tractors, right? And we could start to develop monoagriculture, right? So that's 100 years ago. So suddenly, we've got a lot of seed to sell. Fast forward, after the Second World War now, we've got sort of TV to start to push this down our throats, right, with all the propaganda of suddenly, somehow, saturated fats got demonized with no clinical evidence of it whatsoever. Even to this day, no clinical evidence, never, even for, you know, heart disease, you name it, no clinical evidence. We are made of saturated fat. Every cell membrane is saturated fat. Your brain is saturated fat. It is not polyunsaturated fat. So we went from our natural fats to suddenly eating a huge amount of polyunsaturated fats that we've never ever done before. So guys, you have to ask yourself, what happened to our health? At the turn of the century, we had hardly any cancer, hardly any heart disease. We had other issues, hygiene issues, right? You know, but we've got that act together. We've got modern hygiene now. Now we've got 1 in 3 people with cancer, and 1 in 4 people with heart disease, and one in 5 with blood sugar, diabetic problems, 1 in 7 with respiratory problems. You know the statistics here. What happened? Well, first of all, we did that shift from our traditional fats to the polyunsaturated, the vegetable oils, which are highly inflammatory. Omega-6 up to your eyeball. You don't need it, right? Then it caused what? A lot of sugar, and then a lot of toxins into the food chain, and then other things like the microwave oven, which is not part of the longevity diet. Yeah, you have to bury that one down in the garden. And we now have to deal with electromagnetic energies and all that. But as long as we can get our immune system back, we can deal with all of that, right? So you really need to start. Now, if you're more vegetarian orientated, you can, obviously we're still talking like olive oil is fantastic, right? And coconut oil, and we actually, avocado and palm oil can, you know. But if you really, really want to get into the longevity protocols, you go back to the saturated fats, which are absolutely delicious. Grandma did wonderful cooking with that. Remember the lard next to the stove? And you came back in 3 months' time and the lard is still there. And there's no fungus on it. It's highly antibacterial and antiviral, right? And absolutely delicious, you know, to get the taste back into the food, right? So lard, tallow, all of those traditional, I highly recommend, right? And then you play with it, right? You dance around with it, right? In the summertime, you might use some lighter fats and oils. In the wintertime, you might go to the more rugged ones like lard and duck fat, etc. Used across the board. So we do play around. We've got sesame here, we've got flax, you know, sesame oil was the oil of Asia, and lard. So those modern books on the blue zone diet, where they had a low-fat agenda, they're completely corrupted. They're just fundamentally wrong. You know, where they sort of go, oh, they didn't use any saturated fats. No, traditional people use them all the time. They had pigs there. Everybody had pigs. They were using it all the time, right? Get the idea? And we just lost it. We lost the plot completely. So part of the ancestral eating is finding that wisdom again and incorporating it into your culinary art, right? And don't forget, as you'll see, the saturated fats, we better keep moving here. Okay, I've covered that, yeah. Totally essential to good health. Your saturated fat plays a role in all of this. To keep your bones strong, to keep your cell membrane strong, the mitochondria strong, the heart strong. Relies on saturated fats, not polyunsaturated fats, right? The liver uses it to help to get rid of toxins out of the body. The lungs can't function without saturated fats. The list just goes on and on and on. Of course, the immune system needs saturated fats. And so we need it for growth and absorbing the nutrients. Remember this idea that you need the fats there to drive in the nutrients. You need the fats there to drive in the minerals, right? Here's another list of some of the traditional fats and oils that we highly recommend, including butter. You know, if you just want to play with a lighter form of fat, then start with butter, right? Or ghee is also very good to use, right? So I can't stress this enough. This is where a lot of degenerative disease, this is where inflammation has come from, which is the basis of all health problems. So if you want an anti-inflammatory diet, you have to discard the vegetable oils and reorientate to some healthy vegetable oils, like I've mentioned, but then the traditional fats and oils. Very, very important to do. You get a lot of good results within a month or two of using that. You could test it yourself. You could get a blood, get your biomarkers from just the standard ones, right? Do this style for 1 or 2 months, 5 to 6 weeks, I say. Go back and get your blood done. And those inflammatory biomarkers have already started to drop down. Prove it to yourself. Just don't listen to me. Okay, we've covered this. You remember who grew up with cod liver oil? And you're kind of like going, oh, Mum. And then later you go like, oh God, thank God she was on the case. Because it wasn't very tasty in those days. It was like, now they've got some great cod liver, like lemon flavored and so forth, So sometimes, people who are more like vegetarian orientated, and it's sort of hard to gravitate back into the saturated fats and some of these animal products that I'm talking about. At least you can get back into fish, the fish oil and the cod liver oil. And that's so important for you. If you don't do that, that's fine. But don't do that to your children, right? Your children need saturated fats. They need omega-3s. Technically, they need animal proteins, right? So don't let that dogma interfere with the health of your children. I say that very strongly because I'm a health counsellor and I see it all the time. Okay. So it's very questionable how you get your vitamin D. We do only get a certain amount from the sun. We really do rely on getting it from a food source. then so some people will go, oh, okay, I'll just take a supplement. Good try. Unfortunately, it's just these supplements like vitamin K and vitamin D, if you're vegetarian, at least don't stop taking them, but just so you know, they're not very bioavailable. They're only bioavailable from food. Right? And we have chronic, one thing we noticed in the pandemic, you know, with people discussing health issues and all of that, if you notice that pretty much everybody agreed on both sides of that whole argument, everybody agreed that, wow, we really are vitamin D deficient. Did you notice that in all the discussions going on? They suddenly, because people were starting to get blood tests done, they hadn't done for ages, and it's coming back. They're pretty much, most modern people are vitamin D and vitamin K and vitamin E deficient. So it's a food source, guys. That's where you need to get it from. And so very, very important. And so very, very important. And so with the carotene from a vegetable source, again, it's really, really tricky, guys, to get that vitamin A from a vegetable source. Very, very tricky. Keep trying. Okay, you're getting the idea here that traditional foods all contain high levels of A and D, and this is what traditional people ate all the time. We call it the bricks and mortar. So if another way of, say, getting vitamin K, and say if you're more vegetarian orientated, but you're flexible, you will take some sort of animal, because now I hope you're starting to realize how important it is. Emu oil has the highest source of vitamin K on the planet, and that's readily available over the internet. And I highly recommend that you do that if you're vegan, and well, if you're vegetarian. Usually there's some room to move with vegetarians. You know, there's the flexitarian, etc. I highly recommend that you get the vitamin K, right? The emu oil. And by the way, I take it, even though I am eating all these things, because of travel and all that. It's part of the supplements that I take every day. Because it's very easy to get quickly deficient in vitamin K. Highly important in your diet. So this diagram here is the modern diet. I think you get the idea. I don't need to spend time on this. We don't need any of this. Occasionally you might with friends. You know, we're into the joy de vivre, very much so. I always say that what we want to do with our students is make such a strong digestive system that you have no fear of food. You can live the life that you want. You know, occasionally you have a bit of this and a bit of that, but it doesn't sort of throw you off balance, because you know you can always come back to center again in your own kitchen, with your own food energetics, with your own power of healing, right? But pretty much 99% of the time, this is thrown out the window and approached with a 40-foot barge pole.
Just a quick question about the fats again.
Yeah.
How important is it that the meats we're eating are like grass-fed or
Absolutely.
organic? So
Yeah.
if you're eating like a supermarket chicken, you're not going to get the benefits of...
Well, you get a little benefit, but not, you know, you'll get the benefit of the amino acids and the protein, but you're not getting the benefit of those healthy fats. Absolutely. You want, but when we talk about animal fats and animal, we talk about the highest quality you can get, which is from your local farmer whose farming practices ethical again, which was the Vegetarian Society. Did you know that they weren't vegetarian all at the beginning? It was formed in Liverpool, the first. It's an interesting history. It was about the reaction of the industrial age and how they started to farm the animals. They were appalled, and so are we. Right? So we're going back to those, finding the farmers that are doing organic farming, who are doing grass-fed, who are doing regenerative agriculture, permaculture practices, and the good news is, guys, it's around. You can tap into that. So that's a good question. Yeah, we really are after the grass-fed, the organic. When it comes to the fats, that's important. But within saying that, if like when I go shopping, I don't always get, like, that's not available. I would go to the second quality. I would, it's okay, you know, but you don't want to be having that poorer quality all the time. Yeah. So that one's where a lot of problems, you know, the soda drinks. You see, you used to do your fish and chips in lard. So if you can find a fish and chip shop that's doing it in lard, then I will come with you. But everybody's doing it in vegetable oil. And so pretty much all the fried foods we avoid like the plague, right? Because it's just incredibly inflammatory, acid forming, omega-6s, free radicals, you know. So yeah, we don't do the fried food. But at home, you can use lard, especially for deep frying and for party foods, you know. We would say that party eating is different to your day-to-day eating. It has to be more exciting, a bit more wild, you know, and to, you know, let your hair down sort of thing. So watch out for the deep fried foods. If you're after like a little something naughty, just have a chocolate cake. Don't have the chips. Get the idea? The chocolate cake, guys, you'll burn it off. The sugar, you'll just... That deep fried chips in the vegetable, you don't burn that off. It goes deep in there. So if you're after like out with the friends and you know whatever's happening, go for the sugary things, if you know, because you need something to eat with your friends. Don't do the deep fried chip things. Yeah, get the idea? Because you technically you'd burn that off very, very quickly. Still not great, but it means you can hang out with your friends, which is more important than food.
Time check over at 7:30.
Okay, let me keep going. I'll go faster. So we love Paul, but his heart was in the right place, but didn't really have all the ducks lined up. So this you want to avoid like the plague. You just get into doing your own salad dressings. Never ever buy a salad dressing. If you buy a salad dressing, I will be behind you in the supermarket with a big stick. I'm watching you. Never ever do that. You know, now you've got the olive oil and the vinegars and the mustard, and it's healthy. And the thought of actually buying salad dressings. Anyway, moving on, you get the idea here. This is the way your vegetable oils are made. This is what they're associated with everything from cancer to liver damage. You all know the story about trans fats. That's been around for some time now, how damaging they are.
What's a trans fat? Roger?
Well, most of them are illegal now, but you've added the hydrogen to stabilize it. And then it's gone into a lot of processed foods. You know the joke, you know, you can buy the McDonald's hamburger and then come back in a year's time and it's still the McDonald's hamburger. That's all the trans fats. So it's stabilized it for all the processed foods. But we don't buy processed foods anymore, do we? From time to time you might, but hopefully it's naturally processed. You know, to save money, you just buy, you don't shop in the middle part of the supermarket. Actually, the challenge is stop shopping at the supermarket. If you can, you know, the farmer's market, community-minded agriculture, finding the growers, direct to the growers, to the eggs, to the, you know, if you can do that 90% of the time, you're saving a hell of a lot of money. And you're going to get really healthy and live a long, happy life, just doing that. So we stay away from the supermarket as much as possible. Okay, Gina, do you want to... Can I keep... It's not 7:30, can I keep going? Because we're going to go on to the home remedies now.
Yeah.
So I've put a little package together here. It is, I do spend a whole weekend. This is part of our training that we go through home remedies. This evening I'm just going to touch on a few categories. I know some people here are really tuned into it and you've been studying it. So I'm open to other ideas that you have in this section. You know, some people might know some other remedies for certain things, yeah? The first thing I'd like to say is it's part of the theme of being your own doctor. The whole idea of to just look after these minor ailments yourself. Personally, I always say that food and drinks and herbs and home remedies, that's what you can control, right? That's you being your own doctor. Next stage is you actually go to somebody, like you get a massage, you get a sauna, you step out of your kitchen to do that, right? But it's still quite manageable and it doesn't cost much. The next stage might be to go to a specialist, and that would be an acupuncturist or Western herbalist or aromatherapy expert, or and then the one way down the end of the track is, the pharmacy, where you could get a cough, and then the next stage is actually a Western doctor. So there's a place for all of that. It's not like we're against Western medicine, obviously, that's amazing stuff. It's just not what we go to begin with, right? And there's surprising amount of things that you can manage just with good. I mean, the idea with a good diet is this doesn't happen so much, right? You're preventing these things, but they will happen, right? And it means that you've got something that you can deal with it, and usually the symptoms won't last very long because you've got a lot more healthier, and your immune system is, a lot stronger. So it's sort of easy to kind of heal yourself once you've done the longevity diet, say for about a year. Your resilience is there. But yeah, we will get headaches from time. We'll get a cold. We'll get a sore back. All of these things will happen. You'll get food poisoning, etc. All of these things will happen. So we need some idea around what we can do at home. So safe, easy, and effective. No side effects, unlike going to the medication. As you know, it's a big front and back. Yes, it can cloud the symptoms, so you might feel better, but then now you're having to deal with all the side effects. Home remedies don't have that. The only thing that can happen is that nothing happened, as in like you didn't select the right one for the cold or the back pain and etc. Get the idea? And wonderful to build the bond in the house. Like when you can give a massage to somebody, or do some aromatherapy, or do some moxa, or some acupressure points for that condition, for that headache. This is a good one for headaches here. It's just you've got a lovely friendship for the rest of your life. The bond, the emotional and psychological bond you can't break that once you start to help and heal one another with these simple go-to remedies. So, there's whole categories here. Water, as you know, and we're going to touch on compresses. We're going to touch on all of this to an extent. So, very easy to use. When you have the so-called acute conditions, and they're yang in nature, there's usually heat involved with that. We just apply the opposites, like yin is cooling, right? So imagine a child has got a fever, or imagine you get like really hot symptoms, and you're starting to get heat up here, and you want to draw the heat away. You can easily go to the kitchen and just get like green leafy vegetables, smash them up, put a little bit of flour to bind it with a cheesecloth, and straight on. Or just like the mother will sometimes just get a cabbage leaf and put it onto the forehead of the baby to draw out the heat. It's the same principle. So, we could use tofu. Tofu's yin in nature. It's cooling. So you crumple it up, you bind it with the flour, cheesecloth, straight on. So these are sort of like drawing out plasters. You can get it done within 3 minutes.
Can I ask you, are you going to circulate this bit. If that's right.
Are you willing to release your PowerPoint?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, then I'll share it.
Yeah.
I mean, we should have a recording that works, and I can put it on. I'll just copy the page. So.
Yeah, no, I'm
There's a lot
fine
of
with
detail there. I'll share it.
Yeah.
And so the opposite, so okay, it's always pays to sort of diagnose what the problem is. And I'm just kind of teaching you a little bit of basic yin and yang. So the heat, remember you want to draw it off with something yin. Whereas the chronic, that's more kind of lingering deeper, usually affects the organ groups, and it's things like chronic pain and chronic back pain as a good example, right? So that's where we'll be using things like the ginger compress, or the tiger balm, or the ginger oil. Now there's a very, very simple one that you can make. Imagine somebody had like a lower back problem, or a muscle sort of cramp here, or anywhere, right? You can simply just get some, like a teaspoon of sesame oil, right? And you just add a couple of drops of ginger juice. You shake it up in a jar, and straight away, straight on. It's excellent. That's if you didn't have the tiger balm in the cupboard. Get the idea? Tiger balm's fantastic. Always pays to have this in the cupboard, yeah? We call it the kitchen pharmacy. Things that you can quickly grab for these kind of ailments. Obviously, just things like hot water, for any kind of cramps, like modern people have, they have a lot of cold drinks often, right? And from a Chinese medicine perspective, modern people have a lot of what we call cooling foods, which mightn't be their medicine. I'll give you an example of that. If somebody is already feeling cold and they're a little pale, etc., that's what we'd call a yin condition. And they will go to the health food store, and from that type of thinking, that analytical thinking, now in the refrigerator is a cold green drink, but it's full of nutrition, right? It's full of the antioxidants and the advertising, and now they're thinking, oh, okay, that's really, really good. But now they're taking a temperature that's also really, really cold, right? So they're not a hot type person, right? They've already got a tendency towards coldness, and now they're taking cold things like excess fruit. Excess fruit is more cooling. Tropical fruits are very cooling. So we would be saying, like, stop the raw food, stop the cold drinks. You need warming foods now. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of, like, menstrual cramps, for instance. Young women actually think that's normal. No, that's a clinical scenario that you need to knock on the head very, very quickly, because that cold energy just goes deeper and deeper and deeper in, and then the blood gets stuck, and then all sorts of problems start to happen. So these warm preparations are very, very good for that kind of descending cold energy. So that's where, we love using the ginger compress. Ginger compress is very easy to make. You grate up some ginger, you squeeze it into a hot pot of water, you dip a tea towel into it, and then basically you've got a hot ginger compress. And then put a towel over, and now your ginger we call the galloping horse. It's like a horse that's driving all the warmth into the body. So ginger tea, ginger compress, very, very good for these cold, stuck conditions. Or what we call like an attack of cold. You've been out in the snow and it's a cold day and you got wet and now you're starting to sort of shiver a bit. That's where you want to expel the cold out of the body very, very quickly by using things like ginger. Get the idea?
If you came in from the cold weather, would you drink a ginger drink?
Absolutely. Yeah. You see, in the summertime when it's hot, when you get to know the thermal temperatures of herbs and foods, in the summertime you don't want ginger. It's hot, right? So you have chamomile, or get the idea? Whereas in winter time, it's like you're freezing, your hands are cold. No, this is when you want ginger or something warming. Okay. Did it? Oh yeah. I think I always say it really pays to do like a first aid training. Most, like in Australia, we have the ambulance service, and they put on like a one-day training in first aid. Does anybody do that here? Have you noticed? It's really good to do, just that one-day training. Because just in case you're around a car accident, or even in the home, when people burn themselves and cut themselves, etc. So we should all have the sort of the general knowledge of that. I think that's very important. And then, basic things like burns in the house. You've all heard of aloe vera. So it really pays to have a bottle of aloe vera around, right? To put onto any kind of burn. Sometimes you can just grab things like miso as well and put it on until it's properly bandaged later. Miso is very cooling and it has good antibacterial, antiviral action to it. The farmers has anybody heard oil of egg? This is what we did in the alchemical, one of the ingredients we made in Iceland, where we set up an old-fashioned alchemical lab with all the tubes and everything. But the farmers of England and America and Europe and Australians were really good at home remedies because the next hospital was like 1,000 miles away. So those homes all had, at the turn of the century, they all had these thick books of home remedies. And you can actually come across them at antique sales. They're absolutely fascinating. By the way, when you look through those books, half of the remedies are with vinegar. Vinegar cured everything. A snake bite, stomach upset, headache, you name it. Anyway, the point I'm making is the farmers would get, it's a bit of a process, but they'll get a whole lot of eggs and they bake it, and they're able to extract the oil out of it, and they would always have that jar in their garage, because it's if they ever got a burn, it's one of the most amazing, instead of that scar, for the rest of your life, if you get the oil of the egg on it, and you burnt yourself really, really bad, in 2-3 weeks, the scar's even gone. It's incredible. That happened to me once. I had the oil of the egg from that workshop, and I was in my kitchen in New York, and I was cooking some salmon, and I like cooking that in lard. So I had the lard heating up, and you know how you don't pay attention sometimes. So I put the salmon and it's almost like slow motion, that hot oil came up and over, and a big wallop of it, really, really hot, like landed on it. That's a swear word. And oil of egg, incredible. So you could probably Google that to, for those who are really into studying this more deeply. That's a really good one for burns. Okay, there's obviously just water, and water's traditionally one of the most healing things. There's sacred water. There's, if you can ever get water from a well, that's really, really good. That's Mother Earth's vibrations and frequencies there. And it's sort of very, very important to have what we call structured water, because every cell of the body has got structured water around it. Right? You can easily make some structured water sometimes just by having your filtered water, but then put some lemon cuttings into it, because that vibration from nature starts to structure that water again. But just to let you know, like in Austria and Czech Republic, there's lots of areas that you can go where there's like the water spas. So if you've never experienced a water spa, I highly recommend that you do it. You used to have bath as a But they don't have a. Is it still a water spa? You can go into the healing waters and sit there
Like,
in Bath. Is it open to the public?
Harrogate.
Hmm?
Harrogate used to.
Where?
is the
Harrogate.
Harrogate room in Harrogate? Is it still available to go bathing?
No, I don't think so.
So you see, it's not too available in England anymore, is it? So all over Austria, and if anybody gets sick in Austria and in Czech Republic, the government even pays for them to go for 6 weeks into the water spa. Right? And if you're ever in New York State, you might have heard of Saratoga. The Saratoga summertime is the horse racing, but that's a spa town. And at the turn of the century, they didn't have modern medicine at the turn of the, they didn't have penicillin, so they had to go to the home remedies a lot. And they actually built these wonderful buildings. There used to be like a dozen of them. There's only 2 left. And people who had polio and all sorts of things would go to these spas. Right? And I've been probably to over 20 spas around the world. I highly recommend it. If you want a holiday, go to a spa town and get healthy and get the water, that vibration of water. And it's fantastic. And the food is quite good. It's lighter food, and you know. The point I'm making, Saratoga, that water is the highest charged up water I've ever come across. This is in New York State. So now, when you go there, you don't find any Americans there. I always kind of joke that they're lining up for their chemotherapy, right? You find the Hungarians, you find the Russians, you find the Czech people, the Austrians, the Germans, because they know it. They know that, wow, this is, you know, we're going to sit in the water, we're going to drink the water for 4 days, you know. They might fast a little bit, you know, it's fantastic. Really good. Then if you can combine that with a sauna and the water, that's even better.
Iceland had the waters, didn't it? Do you remember sitting in the water with the silica-rich water, different colours in Iceland?
Oh yes, yeah.
So can I just ask you, what
Yep.
like cold showers or plunge?
Really good idea, yeah. It's part of the biohacking theme. We'll have a break soon, but you know, that whole idea of hot and then cold and hot and cold, it's so good for the body. And the whole idea, you know, Scandinavian people know this for hundreds of years, and now it's sort of being modernized. People are realizing how wonderful it is. The health statistics of people from Finland and generally from Scandinavia is pretty good when they're practicing those traditional home remedies, you know, the sauna and cold water and cold showers, etc. Or, you know, nowadays they even talk about the, you know, getting yourself into the ice and then the hot. So yeah, the body, it's called generating the sirtuins, S-I-R-T-U-I-N. It basically, what happens is genetically, we've got these genes that are all geared up for survival, and they're called the sirtuin genes. And if you want to activate those deep survival genes, which is good for your longevity, what you do is you sort of challenge yourself a little bit, and that can be just like something like fasting for 24 hours, right? I don't recommend long terms fasting. I can take some questions about fasting after a break, but it's sort of, you're challenging your body, you know, when you're fasting, and that generates the sirtuins. When you go from the hot to the cold, that kind of challenge, or dipping yourself into the really, that generates the sirtuin genes. And that stimulates your longevity gene, so it's a damn good idea, and it's celebrated in the what we call the biohacking world. You know, those who are getting into wanting to sort of trick nature. That's generally what you're doing. Because nature's all get up. Like nature's not interested with you after 30. Have you noticed? It's going, oh, you're boring to us. No. Not going to go there. Okay, so that's the bath. You know, and of course you can be using the water for, you know, nice warm bath, getting some chamomile herbs, you know, just out of the kitchen, brew it up, throw it into the bath. These are de-stressing strategies. I always say that you shouldn't be drinking alcohol every day. It's not a good idea. Alcohol is actually part of the longevity practice. It's been around because it's a probiotic basically. But your liver it's a hard job for your liver to be, especially modern alcohol, by the way. Modern alcohol's got like 9%, 12%. Traditional alcohol had sometimes less than 1% or 2%. There's, when you look at those old menus from 150 years ago, and they were having their porridge and their mead and their beer for breakfast, that beer was fermented wheat, and it was sprouted wheat, and you think, oh, they must be getting drunk at breakfast. No, it's less than 1%, and they had this wonderful fermented drink, which is actually helping them work in the fields for the next 14 hours and not getting tired. Right? So it's part of it all, but we need some just de-stressing things, like candles, aromatherapy, beautiful music, turn the TV off because it's so stressful, unless you're watching a really good show, which is part of modern life, and things like a nice herbal bath, just getting rid of all that environmental stress and the work stress and the business stress and emptying out. So there's a whole range there. That's easy to figure out. I would say to you, anything that is like any dried herbs that you got in your kitchen, just brew it up and throw it in the bath. Why not add some seaweed to that while you're at it? Make it really primordial.
That's what I brought back from Northumberland. I brought a bucket of seaweed that I found on the beach, and I put it in the bath.
Good on you.
And then I put it in the garden.
Yeah.
A lot of work.
Yeah, it's good for the liver, yeah. French people to this day use mud and clay. So I don't know if you had noticed this, but when you go into a French supermarket and things, there's always sometimes you can buy the clay, the medicinal clay that you can add to water and drink. So it's been very, very popular in the French culture. But it's been around, everybody's used this, Aboriginal people, Maori people, Indian people, where there's certain soils and certain clays. Now you can buy medicinal clay, from the internet, etc. Basically it's very good for parasites, very good cleansing, very good for food poisoning. I would say to you, also have some activated charcoal also in your kitchen pharmacy. Activated charcoal you can buy over the internet. Very, very good for food poisoning, stomach upsets, or you had a very, very rich meal with your friends and too much wine and you're feeling, get some activated charcoal in there. It just really gathers all of that out and gets it out of the body. Or try your clay. Very, very effective, very alkalizing and cheap. So you can make quick compresses, like, you can get the tea bag, and sometimes people get like a bee sting, right, or wasp sting. You can just get the tea bag, soak it, and straight on. It has lovely drawing out properties to it. This one here is really interesting. See the wood ash? So when I grew up in New Zealand, we didn't even have like a stove. We had a chip heater. The old-fashioned cast iron. I, as a boy, had to go and light the fire for Mum to cook on and to heat the hot water. It's not like we were poor. This was actually in the city. It's just that later on, Mum got a cooker and she was celebrating with champagne for the next 7 weeks. Later on, she got a refrigerator and the champagne came out. We didn't even have we just had the pantry next to the cold part of the house. It was a cupboard. And the fresh meat would be in there for just one day, and the milk would arrive, unpasteurized in those days. It was virtually raw milk, and butter, and everything else was fresh. Right? And then that wood, I would have to empty it out, and I'd take it out to the garden. So my father grew up on a farm, and the wood would always go out onto the rows of vegetables that we had. And of course I didn't think much of it until I started to study this regenerative agriculture, which I'm really into. And so our ancestors used to do this all the time. You're probably familiar with it, you know, the farmers used to do this all the time. And that potash, you can actually buy potash in the nursery for your garden. That's what it is. And all of those minerals, that magnesium, phosphorus, and you know, all the minerals would be going back into the soil, back into the plants, and creating really, really strong vegetables and plants. And that we'd be eating. That traditionally we used to eat. That we don't get anymore at all. Now, then traditional people would take that potash, add water to it, and that was a compress for just about everything under the sun. Again, very, very good for burns, very good for boils, very good for drawing out eczema as well. You wrap it around with potash. So it's basically just the ash from the fireplace, from wood. Get the idea? And we've lost that one. If we were able to, it's a bit tricky to bring that one back, but if we were able to bring that back into agriculture, we'd solve a lot of problems with our demineralized soils. You can just do a simple cottage cheese compress for drawing out heat.
Roger, where do you put the compress? So you do it in an envelope or something?
It's cheesecloth.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then where do you put it?
Anywhere that there's a problem. So you just, you know, if it was here, back here, anywhere, you can put it on the head. Ginger compress you don't obviously put on the head, it's always on the back, around the kidneys, or on the abdomen. Okay, we're getting close to having our break. I mentioned the ginger oil, that's a really good one. Remember, sesame oil with a couple of drops of ginger, really, really handy to have for, you know, somebody's got some tight shoulders, just rub it in. Muscle cramp, rub it in. Lower back, chronic back problems, rub it in, and then wrap a towel around and sleep with it overnight. There's another really good one that you can do for chronic back pain. You know, that where they're like virtually bedridden, right? You get just cheap salt. It doesn't have to be your high quality, you know, killed. Just cheap salt, like kosher salt or something, whatever you can find that's reasonably priced. A nice big skillet. You heat it up really slowly, but if you want, you can put it in the oven and heat it up really, really slowly. So now you've got this hot salt, right? Really hot. You get 2 pillow slips. So you fill the first pillow slip up with it, and then you, of course, you use the other one to secure that hot salt because you don't want it dripping onto your skin, right? And so now you wrap, so now you've got that hot salt in a pillow slip, you put it onto the kidneys or the lower back. Kidneys control the lower back, and that chronic back problem is a kidney qi deficiency for us. So there's lots of good foods that you can use for that as well. And you get a towel, and you wrap it on, and you sleep with that overnight. It's that warmth goes into the kidneys. See, what disturbs the kidneys is cold energy. Remember I gave that little scenario, people were having too much cold energy. Iced drinks, cold drinks, things that they think are healthy, like a green drink, but it's cold, right? Too much salads, too much fruit, we consider sometimes just too much cold energy. And then it gets locked into the kidneys, and that's where these chronic problems come from. So that's a really good compress also for anybody who's doing like a cold turkey thing. You know, where they're going through a withdrawal. That salt compress is really good for that. And let's see what we got here. Okay, we're going to finish off with a couple of things that you should have in your kitchen pharmacy for the immune system. So astragalus is our number one go-to herb that we use for our immune system in Chinese medicine. Easy, like Morale might have it as a powder, that's fine. You can buy it as the herb, and that's what we put into our stocks. But you can buy it as a powder, and you can take it as a supplement, right? And it's what really, those astragalosides, especially astragaloside 4 and the psychoacetyl, which I'll talk about later, that's really, really nourishing the immune system. So we've sort of got a polarity for our immune system. Yes, healthy fats, longevity diet, all those ingredients, seed vegetables with all the minerals. Then the astragalus, and over here, the medicinal mushrooms. Like you might have heard of chaga now, you might have heard of reishi, right? Now, if that's what you'd use, but say if your next door neighbour is coming down with flus and colds all the time and their immune system is just like wrecked, and this is far too exotic for them to, what's reishi, what's chaga, what's that? Well, I don't know. Just get them to go to the Western herbal shop, the supermarket, you can find it, and you can find beta-glucan, G-L-U-C-A-N, beta-glucan. And it's as cheap as anything, and that's what nourishes, those beta-glucans is what nourishes the immune system. It's just a cheap supplement. You get them to take several of them in the water. Over 2 to 3 days now, they're bringing their immune system back. So that's a no-brainer for them. It's not strange, it's not odd. But what you can be doing on a regular basis is be taking the astragalus and the medicinal mushrooms in any shape and form, because that's what's going to, A, deal with any kind of current immune deficiency, like you often get colds and flus, and you're sick and tired of that, right? But you start to take them so that your immune system gets intelligent and adaptive and strong. And the reason why I threw the adaptive and intelligent in there is if you start to take the astragalus and the medicinal mushrooms, you're now creating an immune system that's intelligent, that if there's another little superbug that comes around in the next 5 years, 10 years, whoever, whenever, you don't have your confidence level is going to be very, very high to deal with it. Just like we had a very, very high confidence level in the recent pandemic, right? Because we've been doing these adaptogenic, tonic herbs, etc. You can create an intelligent immune system where it figures these things out, it adapts, and it knocks it out. Get the idea? You need the medicinal mushrooms to do that, and the astragalus. That's the two power ingredients there for any kind of immune deficiency. And now there's things that you can do with just going to a Chinese supermarket, Chinese herbalist. You can walk into a Chinese herbalist and ask, do you have a remedy for migraine? Do you have a remedy for sore throat? Right? I don't have time to go through all of that, but you can wander in there. Most of them speak English, right? And most of them got young people there really with it, and they're often trained in herbalism, and they'll give you off-the-shelf remedies that actually don't cost much. Okay, so that's things like the jade winch. If you have the onset of the cold happening, there's these herbal potions that you can start to take. Right? You might have heard of this next one, yin chow. Have you heard of yin chow? Every Chinese person knows this. Every Chinese home has this in their kitchen pharmacy. Yeah, so it's good to have in your kitchen pharmacy if you have that onset of the cold happening. So there's a number of those sort of things. You can do Western herbalism as well, and homeopathics. There's the famous fire cider, which is an old English remedy, and they had all these things, thrown in, and they would brew it up and ferment it for a couple of days, and then have it on hand to drink. As you can see, it's really, really loaded up. Very, very good for dispersing a cold. There's your ingredients there. Okay, and we're coming up to having a break, because the last section tonight is the biohacking.
Wow.
So any questions so far of that last segment? You know, the longevity diet principles, guidelines, ingredients, home remedies. Yeah.
What about like frozen veg and frozen fruit? No.
Oh, you know, there's a place for, you know, there's a place. We're modern people, and you know, our preference is always fresh because the life force is really good, right? But hey, if you're going to get some frozen berries, that's about as far as I'd go. I would never do frozen vegetables. But you know, you get the frozen berries, and then later on, if you're making a dessert or something, or you need something for your porridge, that I would say to you, that's fine. But you know, look, the other thing is sometimes convenience is a big deal. This has to be practical,
Yeah.
otherwise and it has to meet the budget. I think it really meets the budget. So we like all the tricks of the trade. That's why I said to you, you know, make your stock that's going to last for, 4 weeks. You know, in the health food store, you can get those really healthy beans in the can. You should have several of them in your cupboard, because, you know, cooking beans takes 2 to 3 hours, and you forgot to do it, you know, you come home and tired. You can get some organic beans ready to go, throw them in, saute some shiitake mushrooms and vegetables, throw them in, and voila, you've got a nice meal. So we do like to make it easy. We need, otherwise people won't do this, right? I don't personally do the frozen vegetables, but is that like is that something like you buy from a supermarket or you do yourself?
Buy frozen spinach.
Yeah, I wouldn't bother. Yeah, and spinach is one of those things that we don't celebrate this. Spinach is nice, but it's full of the oxalates acid. And also spinach, you know, when you get it non-organic, it's got a lot of pesticides. You know, when you look at the list of the strawberries up there, that's got the most pesticides, and the spinach is the next one, you know. So just go for fresh greens, you know. And you know, okay, they don't always have to be organic, but generally try to get organic and whatever's fresh and what's in season.
But also it depends how regularly you shop them as well, so it's got like fits in with family life, sometimes frozen food.
Yeah, okay, so you work it out. There's a place, you know, and maybe you're kind of tired and you need something, you know, that you, as long as you don't put it in a microwave.
Well, did you all explain that? Because it's a real no-no, isn't it?
We like fire, real fire, and microwave is just the sort of frequencies that your immune system does not need at all. I mean, you know that we're very, a lot of us have, you know, talk about electromagnetic fields. Well, at least we can deal with it when we've got a good immune system. But when you take something internally from a microwave into your body, that starts to break down your immune system. So, you know, if you are going to get frozen, try and get organic, healthy, you know. Make sure it's a quality thing, plus it's a life force thing. We really are after those fresh things. I mean, you know, isn't it once a week shopping ribbon for you? Why would vegetables not last a whole week when you buy them fresh? You can put them in the fridge and...
It's the spinach, because it's different. It's not carrots, that's what happened. Peas, they're only around for a small time of the year, and they take a long time to do. So that's one frozen vegetable that kind of is in many different pieces.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, Roger. Living where we do here, you know, particularly winter time, this sort of seasonal stuff that is produced here is very limited.
Yeah. Okay,
so
that's good for me to know.
Has to come
I would say,
elsewhere.
I said there's a place for this. You have to work it out. I mean, there's definitely a place for it. You don't want to starve.
But circling back to spinach, is that not a good food then?
It's not my first choice. And secondly, you try and get it organic. And spinach is quick to cook.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's just that some foods do soak up the pesticides really quickly. And it's strawberries do. You always want to buy organic strawberries because it's just full of pesticides. Spinach is, if you don't get it organic, it's full of pesticides. And it's oxalic acid. It's a vegetable like the chard family. It's high in oxalates. Now, a little bit of that is fine, but it's part of the chemistry of that food group, and it's something that it's like the nightshade family. It's okay to have a little bit, like potatoes, eggplant, green peppers, etc. But you don't want to be overloading with the nightshade family, similar to chard and spinach. Don't make it your staff of life. You know, your staff of life should be the cabbage family, quite frankly. It's like the cruciferous family. You know, the broccolis and the cabbage and the broccoli, all of that. And you know, fresh onions and carrots and pumpkin and sweet potatoes.
We make, sorry, we'll come back to that, don't want to second, but we make lots of smoothies, so that tends to go in for spinach, like wheat smoothies, but it's a no-no, really.
Yeah, I wouldn't use it. Yeah, I wouldn't use it, yeah. Try and always get things fresh and in season if you can. Somebody else had you had a question at the back, yeah? Sorry, I don't know your name.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking like to have a list of superfoods or super ingredients so we know what's good.
Well, you could always do our training because I've only got 2 hours to do tonight.
No, but like if you had it, because obviously it's difficult to understand what.
What I've mentioned so far, some of the superfoods would be the goji berries. I don't think I mentioned chia seeds, but they really are a good superfood, and you can soak them overnight, add it to your porridge. I would consider a superfood is the tonics that I mentioned, the Romania, that's a tonic herb, that's a superfood, right? And I'm going to kind of maybe mention a couple more, but it's actually, we spend a whole weekend just on superfoods, and we actually cook with them. You know, there's a whole weekend devoted to it. It's a really big subject. But that gets you started, yeah? Think of your goji berries, your chia seeds. Think of your berries as well. That's superfoods. You know, think of your blackberries, your blueberries. They're wonderful. Our preference, by the way, is berries rather than fruits. Fruits, you eat a little bit more fruits in the summertime when they're in season. Our ancestors didn't eat much fruit. In nature, have you noticed fruits around for a couple of weeks? And if the birds didn't get to them first, get the idea, and then they're gone. And so, what did happen, say with apples, they would actually make apple pie, or they would stew fruit, and that's a lot more healthier in a cold season than taking raw fruit. Raw fruit is very damaging as far as Chinese food. If your condition is unstable, you're cold, stuck blood, all these, you don't want to be having fruit. But if you crave it, you might stew it and put some cinnamon in there or some ginger in there. So, you know, you warm it up with your herbs, and then it becomes palatable. You warmed it up, put your cinnamon in, for instance. Get the idea? You're now changing that energetic qualities from something that's very cold to something that's warming and tonifying and good for building blood, and you're not going to damage your digestive system. Remember that concept of putting out the digestive fire? Like if you go to India, you think, oh, you know, how come they're not drinking cold Coca-Cola on a hot day, right? And you speak to the older people, oh, we'd never take anything cold. We always sip the warm teas even when it's really hot because I don't want to damage my digestive fire. It's exactly the same principle in Chinese medicine. You don't want to damage that digestive fire. Generally, we're sort of wanting warming and tonifying, even in summertime, at least room temperature and somewhat warming and tonifying. Right? Okay.
What do you think of proper Greek yogurt?
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You know, it's up there as the traditional foods, you know, kefir, yogurt. Our preference is that it's made from raw milk. That's the big difference. And sometimes that's hard to do. Sometimes in Greece, in those villages, you can get it, you know. And that's what's associated with the Mediterranean diet, is when those dairy foods are actually made from raw. See, as soon as you heat milk, you've lost it. Don't drink modern milk, guys. to stay away from modern dairy food. It's just as toxic, if not worse than sugar. It's probably worse than sugar because the casein, once you heat the milk, the casein hardens and your liver, it struggles with casein. It's very damaging, you know. So we want the traditional raw milk, and then that's why you make Gina makes this amazing raw cottage cheese from it. You can get it, by the way. You can get raw milk, you have to go to the farm and you have to get organised and all that. But, so in answer to your question, we love the kefir, the yogurts, absolutely. That's one of our traditional probiotics. See, in Japan and China and Korea, they had miso soup and tamari and these sort of things. Whereas here, we have kefir and yogurt and fermented wheat for beer making and these sort of things.
Sorry, can I just ask you about like soya milk and oat milk and things like that?
Yeah, is that a question about soy milk?
Yeah.
Yeah, and goat's milk and oat's milk and all of that? Yeah. Okay, number one is raw milk. It's so incredibly nutritious. You can do your own research now, yeah? Go to the Western Price Foundation website and look at all their amazing research on raw milk. So that's a number one. Number two, and by the way, when it's raw, you don't have the lactose intolerance problem because you've got the enzymes to digest the milk. That's the whole point of the exercise. Nature put the enzymes in there to be this amazing, nourishing food. In answer to your question, a little bit of soy milk's not going to kill you, but I wouldn't overdose on it. It's like a little quality thing. You'd have to get really good organic soy, make sure it's not GMO, but that a little bit of oat and these other things, but I wouldn't take too much. Sometimes people get, even with oat, because it wasn't properly processed, it wasn't soaked overnight, you have the phytic acid that could still be there, so some people still get problems from drinking oat and almond milk. You know, so you have to gauge it yourself. But there's a place for all of those. And certainly goat's milk is, again, it has to be raw though, otherwise don't bother. Okay. So you've got some choice there. Sometimes you just have to gauge it. A big thing about diagnosis is forget the blood tests and all the expensive things. You go like, how do I feel after eating that? That's being your own doctor. That's a big one, guys. That's power. That's self-mastery, right? I don't get any of the blood tests done. I just go with how I feel about, and kind of what happened to me afterwards. Was my mood smooth? Was my emotion smooth? Did I get in an argument after eating this? Or too much coffee? Or, wow, I really overdid it with the red wine and I got overheated about something ridiculous. Get the idea? I gauge that myself. Be your own doctor. So, test it. But quite frankly, don't OD in the soy, because it is a bit of an estrogen producer. We use soy as miso, tamari, shoyu, natto, which is, by the way, natto is very good for the vegetarians for vitamin K, and you can get high quality natto, it's fermented soy. And tempeh is good. But then the soy milk, a little bit, but you don't want to, it's an estrogen producer, I think, when it's not fermented.
Thank you.
Another question.
Yeah.
Only referring to raw milk. Can you heat raw milk now?
Mm-hmm. Warm it up.
And that's okay then, because we have, say...
No, you just, to make it, how do you warm it up? You don't boil it, unless you're doing other things,
Because I put, say, milk in porridge.
Yeah.
Mostly water with a touch of milk.
Yeah.
So warm milk.
Yeah, and is that raw?
Raw.
You're doing well.
Yeah, we can buy it at Skipton.
Yeah, I heard you can buy it.
I've got a milk thermometer and I get 43 degrees centigrade for the cottage cheese. Not the other recipes that don't use raw milk take it up to 80 or 90. but only 43, and then at that point you're not killing anything off.
Yeah, it's those enzymes that you're up. So that's why modern dairy food is a disaster, because you've killed off all the enzymes, you don't digest it, builds up all the congestion and damp. And that's why it's been bagged by a lot of people, a lot of nutritionists. Oh, I don't eat any dairy food. I can agree with that, but then they leave it. They don't tell you the options, which is this historical use of incredible high quality dairy food that we used in this country, in Europe, in Germany, in Russia, and all over. You know, our Western culture, we used it a lot. Okay, well, time-wise, I better get on to this. Yeah. So, I do spend a whole weekend on this, so I'm going to kind of get into the most important parts for you. There are several biomarkers that you can study, and I'm going to refer to some of them, and some of these that you can then go on to the internet, study more deeper, buy some books on it. You will start to come across this now. It's starting to come out. Some of us have been involved with it for over 10 years, this whole theme of biohacking. There are conferences now that even in the UK, that company there is a UK, this anti-aging systems.com is a UK company, and it's really cool. So during the Cold War, right, Russia was sort of getting behind with all the technologies that America was developing, so they kind of went, oh, let's do another kind of warfare, which was a very esoteric warfare. They were the ones that actually created remote viewing and all of these, and they were getting into all the psychic things, all sorts of really interesting things. And they kind of went, oh, okay, let's make a super soldier, you know, because we don't have the technology that America, we're losing the game, you know. This is before the wall came down. So their scientists, and they've got some of the most brilliant scientists, got into what's called the peptides and the bioregulators. And in a nutshell, these are just like, you know your amino acids, right? And you know that we've got trillions of different types of shapes and forms of amino acids that basically do everything for us. Well, the peptide is just a small little tail version of amino acid. This is in layman's terms, right? But they have these remarkable qualities to them when you work out what it does in terms of the biochemistry of the body. So they really, really did develop, and the wall came down, right? So this Russian scientist picks up his briefcase, walks over to England, right? Opens it up, and the guy who runs it, he just about fell on his, you know, wow, the research around this. And so then this English company started to put all of the bioregulators and peptides together, right? So that's one area that you're going to hear more and more and more. If it's just starting to develop, you're going to hear this term bioregulator and peptides more and more on the press over the next couple of years. Those in the know, and you're now in the know, can go to this website, and I'll recommend, it gets a little complicated, so I'm going to recommend one that you can get started on, and it's the thymus peptide, because out of all of the glands, the thymus is the one that you've got to biohack. It's the one that just drops down, you know, you get 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, the thymus just drops down, right? So you want to build that up. By the way, sea vegetables, don't underestimate sea vegetables, what they do to your glands, including the thymus. So that's one area we're going to look at. We're going to look at the telomeres. So I got involved with telomeres 12 years ago when nobody knew about it, but I was following the work of Elizabeth Blackburn, who's an Australian scientist who won the Nobel Peace Prize for Medicine in 1994, I think it was. And telomeres are the tentacles at the end of your chromosome, and basically the way the telomeres is the way the cell repairs itself, But it's called the Hyalec limit, where the cell can only replicate a certain amount of time, then it dies. Right? But what's doing the replication is the telomeres at the end of the chromosomes. Right? So we have an enzyme called telomerase. She discovered, they discovered telomeres, and a Russian scientist discovered it in 1920 and left it at that. They didn't do anything with it. They didn't know what they did until she came along with her team, and this was phenomenal because it is your biological age. She discovered that the length of your telomeres is directly associated with your biological age. So you kind of know amongst your relatives, your family members, and your next door neighbor that some people, you know, they're 110 and they look like they're 80 and they're behaving like they're 80, or they're 50 and they're behaving like they're 95. Get the idea? That is actually kind of a biological age, right? And it can, for the first time in history, it can be actually measured, and that's essentially your telomere length. So once she put all that information out, there was a big race on to how to stimulate the telomerase. That's the enzyme that actually repairs the telomeres. So don't get confused, there's the telomeres, which was like the little tentacles at the end of the, you often describe them as the little, you know, here's the shoelace, and it's the little, the end of the shoelace is a good way to describe it. Your body stops, the good old nature, right? Not interested with you after 30, right? Your body stops producing telomerase, even by the age of 12, and you know, it starts to go down, right? So in terms of biohacking, the race went on and they spent millions of dollars, this company, Jerome Company, and they discovered that there's a herb. They tested thousands of herbs to see what would stimulate the telomerase. And that cost them, you know, several millions of dollars to do that, as you can imagine. And what they discovered was that out of astragalus, which I introduced you tonight, which we've been using for 7,000 years in Chinese medicine, there's one component. So astragalus goes like the astragalus. The next bioactive is the astragaloside 4, and then the next out of that astragaloside 4 is called cycloestrogenol, right? So they discovered it wasn't the astragaloside 4 that was doing the job, it was the cycloestrogenol that was stimulating the telomerase. They put that on the market at a horrendous price, but around America you have actually anti-aging medical practices. And by the way, that's becoming this is becoming the big deal in America. And they're popping up all over. And as you now know, we've got multi-billionaires who are now going, I don't want to die young. I've got a couple of billion. I'm going to put it towards research to anti-aging and biohacking, and now they're doing it. So it's a really exciting time in Western nutrition. I would say it's been really, really boring in Western nutrition up until this point. I'm going to call it the Renaissance. Western nutrition, we did all, 100 years ago, we knew what a vitamin C was, and we knew what B vitamins were. There was nothing. It was, for me, what was exciting was Chinese medicine and yin and yang and the cultures of longevity. You can read about Western nutrition. I'm not playing it down. I'm just saying it was kind of boring, right? It's all in the textbooks. The research was done 100 years ago, until people started to get serious about anti-aging. You see, all of the diseases come from age. Think about it. The older you get, statistically we know this, the older people get, then all the cancer starts to appear, the heart disease, the respiratory problems, the diabetes all happen. So you start to treat, I'm going to slow down the aging process, I won't get those diseases. Get the idea? That's part of the philosophy here. And it's a wonderful philosophy. It means that your family members you're going to enjoy your family members for another 40, 50 years and all sorts of things. Economically, if you and I who are productive members of society, if you and I keep working, I'm not going to retire, I'm going to keep going at well over 100. We have generated trillions of dollars in economic activity if we start to have a whole generation of us, particularly the baby boomers and all that, really getting into this. I'm not going to die like, grandma and da-da-da. I'm going to get really clever with this. I'm going to start buying good diet, exercise, saunas, positive thinking, meditation, all of that. That goes without saying. And I'm going to get into living a long, healthy health span. And you have to get out of the idea of that when you get older, you're not going to be like this. You'll be like kick-ass. Get the idea? It's a total different attitude. Right? So that's happening all around our Western culture now, big time. And the good news is there's billions of dollars being spent on it. And that's what it takes, by the way. It does take some, because the government is not going to do that. They're busy enough just patching people up with the health service that we provide, which is making us go bankrupt, as you know, with that kind of thinking. So we need a different kind of thinking. We need to start to, it needs to be a health service, not patching up the sick service. You know the difference there, yeah? So we got up to telomeres. We got up to a company that spent many $1 million on it, and then they put this product out on the market, and it cost $14,000 a year. So me and one of my business partners, who really is a rocket scientist, no kidding, he really is a rocket scientist, and he was out of the job for a couple of years. This is about 10 years ago, and we actually biohacked it. We reverse engineered it because we were really pissed off that it was $14,000 a year. And then we worked out that it was actually because they were trying to keep it top secret, and good on them because they just spent a couple $1 million. But you can't keep that away from people, you can only keep it away from, we weren't the only ones, by the way. And we discovered that it was psychoestrogen, we started to manufacture it ourselves. So full disclosure, the Telostep is something that we put on the market as a pure psychoestrogenal. And it does cost a bit, but not $14,000 a year. It's just $1,200 a year, like $100 a month to take it. So you will come across a lot of false advertising around the telomeres now, because it's out there now. And so you're going to get all the false information like, oh, this is it's going to lengthen your telomeres. No, you just look at the ingredients. If it doesn't have the psychoestrogenal, it's not going to do it. Right? See, omega-3 will slow down the telomeres. Right? Quercetin will slow it down. Good, healthy lifestyle will slow it down. But it doesn't lengthen it. That's the difference. So far we've only discovered psychoestrogenal. Maybe in a year or two we'll find new molecules that will trigger that telomerase. So that's one that you should kind of get serious about. That it's a major biomarker as your the length of your telomeres, and you can get that measured now. For instance, there's a company, and they've got an office in the UK. It's lifelength.com. So you just get a little blood sample, ship it off to them. You get a lovely little, you get a consultation with a doctor, and they'll go through all your biomarkers with the telomeres, right? And give you your biological age. I always say that you could do that first, take the Telostep you've got to do it for 12 months, and then do another blood test and prove to yourself, oh, it really is working. So it's some good clinical evidence. Anything with this now, you have to have clinical evidence, otherwise, it's Western nutrition now. You've got to have the science, you've got to have the clinical evidence. So all of this now is all science, right?
So would you have to take it for the rest of your life?
Yes, that's the attitude. You can't just take it for a couple of months. You're wasting your money. You got to do it. Yeah. Okay, mTOR. Has anybody heard of mTOR? Okay, again, remember, you can follow this up with your own research. By the way, this is probably the most clinically proven that it really, 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 really does work. So here's the story. There was, in 1964, there was a group of scientists who went to Easter Island, right? And they scraped off some things off the rocks that, you know, came from outer space, wherever they came from, nobody knows, and like a soil sample. And he took it back to America, but didn't do much about it. And then that company went bust, and then somebody picked it up and put it under a microscope and thought, wow, that's really, really interesting. And then started to cultivate it, and that's where rapamycin came from. And then they put that on the market as people who, forms of it, they use for organ, you know, when you get an organ transplant and then you have to take medication so your body doesn't reject it. So they found a place for that, you know, but then they discovered that it actually works on the mTOR pathway in the body, which is this pathway that it basically builds a lot of amino acids and technically, in a nutshell, we want to slow the mTOR pathway down. If you accelerate it, you get cancer. Get the idea? We want to kind of contain that, right? And so they gave rapamycin to rats, and as you know, we do quite a bit of experiments, not me personally, but because of the biomarkers can be similar to us in certain categories, and they got radical results, like the rats were living 30% longer. And after a short time, they started to look younger. And then they gave them like tasks to do, like how to find the food from the maze. They just did it a lot quicker. All of these things were happening. So they put this on the market, and people in biohacking use it. And the good news is it's as cheap as anything, guys. So you can go to anti-aging systems and buy you'll find it there, rapamycin, and you take one on Monday with food, and take one on Friday with food, and that rapamycin is now slowing down your mTOR pathway. It's also helping with the what's called the senolytic, which is your senescent cells, your dead zombie cells. It actually helps to get these inflammatory old cells out of the body. Okay, so that's a really good one to get started with, right? The other pathway that you can do some serious study with is called AMPK. You'll find quite a lot of interesting material up on the internet. This one, unlike the mTOR, we want to, remember, suppress a little bit. You don't suppress it totally, but you want to kind of slow it down, suppress. AMPK is something that, for instance, the marketers get into it with the weight loss solutions, because generating the AMPK means that you'll burn fat faster. So they've sort of gone overboard with all of that. But if you backtrack to it, you don't have to buy all those expensive things. For instance, longevity diet, good active lifestyle. Of course, I haven't had a chance to talk about movement and exercise. That just goes without saying, yeah? And sunlight and all of these things. That's going to generate your AMPK anyway. But we have in our Tonic herbal medicine a wonderful tea, very economical, called Spring Dragon Tea. And you have to write this down. I forgot to put the website. It's called dragonherbs.com. You go to dragonherbs.com, type in Spring Dragon Tea, you'll find it. You have to get it shipped over from California. You can get it here?
And you can get it on Amazon search here.
Oh, good, from the UK, good. And that's got gynostema in it, which has, this tea is the #1 longevity tea on the planet. And that's science. That's not energetic saying, that's not Chinese, that's science saying that, because gynostema, which is actually a reasonably cheap grass that grows in China, and they grow this in a pristine environment, has over 120 saponins. S-A-T-O-I-N-S, ginseng has only, you know how well ginseng is celebrated in herbal medicine. It's good for the chi of the body, good for men's energy, good for warming the constitution. It only has 30 supplements. This has, there's no other plant on the planet that has this. Right? And they discovered this when a research group went into this area of China that historically lived like 20 to 30 years longer than other parts of China. And this was a research group in the 1970s. So here's this whole region of China, it's not huge, this whole region, and they live longer. So of course people want to research that. And so they arrive there, so there's like 8 in the team, and they're studying everything. They're studying the diet, the water, blah, blah, blah. And they're kind of going like, well, the diet's kind of, I mean, China, as you know, has a peasant diet. It's a healthy diet, right? But there's just like these little variations, you know, you get Szechuan cooking and they use a little bit more of this. It wasn't radically different. The water wasn't radically different. One day, they, you might remember, Gina, when we were in China, people walk around with jam jars with their green tea. You know, the working class, they take the jam jars, you know, to work with them. And they sort of sip on it all day. So one guy's asked, you know, oh, what are you drinking? And the man goes, oh, I'm drinking my poor man's ginseng. Oh, that's very interesting. Can I have a look at that? They put it under the microscope and they just about drop dead. 120 saponins. So they would call it poor man's ginseng, but it's actually the Gynostema grass. So that will activate, it's a wonderful tea. It's like washing all the cells, like putting every trillions of cells in the body like a shower. It's just incredible. And it's going to activate your AMPK, which is burning kind of excess fat, delivering those fats to the mitochondria in the cell. The AMPK is harmonizing the cell membrane and 50 other things that you can study now. Yeah? So that's a really good one for that pathway, which is a major biohacking pathway. You might have come across NAD, N-A-D, through, you know, there's a lot of advertisers that are pushing it now. So NAD is also something that acts on the AMPK. Has anybody come across the supplement NMN? So this is readily available. If I was you, I wouldn't bother with the NAD. Start with the NMN, which you can find on the internet. It's not overly priced. And that's a precursor to NAD, which is something that, again, as you age, you get less and less and less of, and you have to bring those levels back up. If you want to live to 150, you have to get those NAD levels back up. So it's relatively cheap to do. You can get the NMN powder and add it to that lovely yogurt in the morning and down the hatch. That yogurt is a really good delivery for those powders, right? Because of the fats. Okay, you might have heard about the ketogenic diet. It's very popular and they use it clinically and they have great success. The longevity diet that I mentioned tonight, that's easily tweaked to a ketogenic diet. It just, in my opinion, the way they propagate the ketogenic diet is just another extreme. People, and by the way, it looks good on paper, and people do it for what, 2 weeks, and then it's just hard to manage it. Why not have a sustainable diet that you're just going to enjoy for the rest of your life, which actually isn't a diet? It's guidelines and principles and some really thought out ingredients, and then you work out the diet for you, right? It's not a diet, right? But you can easily tweak what I mentioned tonight into a ketogenic, right? It's borderline ketogenic anyway, right? Because of high quality fats. It's just that we keep the complex carbohydrates. The way they propagate the ketogenic diet, they drop out they say don't eat grains, right? Which I think is really dangerous. Right? You need high quality grains, sprout them, soak them. You got to remember, grains, you've got to get some wisdom about how to cook them and prepare them. You need all those B vitamins, otherwise you're going to miss out on fundamental nutrition. And it can be easily tweaked. So there's your website, Anti-Aging Systems. This word, senolytic, that is what they discovered only like 6 or 7 years ago. They discovered, they knew that we had dead cells in the body. Remember, the cell can only replicate to a certain point with the telomeres, and then it dies. And then it hangs around in the body. And they kind of left it at that when they thought, oh, okay, it's just hanging around the body, it's not bothering anybody. And then it was only like about 7 years ago that they actually discovered, no, it's like a really, really noisy neighbor playing AC/DC at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's sending out all these inflammatory markers and exochromes and all sorts of things going on that's disturbing everything. So then the race was on. We got to flush these dead cells out of the body because they actually create havoc. The good news is some of the supplements that you can use that achieve this are very, very cheap and easy. Quercetin is high levels of quercetin in the onion family that we use in the longevity diet. You can buy it as a supplement, and you can take it with the fisetin. You combine that, and you only have to do that. You kind of mega dose in it once a week. You don't take it every day. Get the idea? And that actually helps to get rid of the dead zombie cells. Yeah.
Is that the same as autophagy?
It is. Autophagy is the dead cells. It is exactly the same. Yeah.
I read that when you do an eating window, so that you have a gap in your eating.
Yeah.
When you're not eating anything during that gap time, all the autophagy happens naturally.
Yeah. Fasting. Intermittent fasting.
You wouldn't need the quercetin. If that was the case.
I would add that to it. That's all. You're just doing more. Yeah. But you're dead right. Fasting is part of this tradition. I just don't have time tonight to talk about fasting. But you're absolutely right. If you can just kind of eat a little bit later in the morning, eat a little bit earlier in the evening, late afternoon, and then you've got a really good, natural fast. And then from time to time, particularly in the summer, guys, coming up, it's so much easier to fast. That's the time, in Chinese medicine, that's the time to do a little bit of fast, not in the winter, because you get deficient. So do a 24-hour or 2-day, 3, but yes, you're right, that's where the body, cleans house. But hey, I would add that to it. Yeah.
If you're going to miss a meal, which one would you miss?
I would miss, for instance, that 24-hour fast, what you can do is have breakfast, have a late lunch, and then skip that evening's meal, skip breakfast and lunch the next day, and then have an evening meal. So you went from a non-evening meal to an evening meal. That's 24 hours. That's the easiest way.
And what about the daily fasting or?
Yeah, but that's like getting your eating window squeezed in.
So what about just missing breakfast or dinner? Which one would you miss? If you did every day, you miss breakfast or dinner, which one would you miss? Which one would you recommend to miss?
It's pretty good to miss breakfast.
Okay.
Yeah. But it depends on your body type, depends on your condition. If you're already deficient, right? I wouldn't recommend it for certain people. Breakfast is good. You're building up your blood and energy and building up your yin and your jing. But the point is to have it later in the morning. But here's the deal. Get up, and if you can do some sort of activity before eating, that's what we're after. If you can walk, if you can take the kids to school, if you can, do some gardening, and then you have breakfast. That's really good because you've really burned a lot of excess of, and you've got into the ketogenic sort of state a little bit. You know? So a late breakfast is really good. But that just depends on your type. Some people need to eat early, some people can eat later. Right? Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick question which is coming into my mind, and it's the correlation between the body and the mind, the body and the brain, and in particular dementia, which is something which affects many people as they age. What's the connection between this research and perhaps research which Alzheimer's research is going on? Is there any kind of connection between body and brain deterioration, cells and so on?
Oh yeah, big time. Like in a nutshell, the first half of tonight I went through the ingredients of the longevity diet. If you do that approach, you won't get Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is like inflammation of the brain. This is an anti-inflammatory diet, and we're using the fats. Saturated fats are anti-inflammatory. So you really want those healthy fats, so you don't get Alzheimer's. And you really want to have the blood sugar levels not fluctuating like this, but just smoothed over day to day, so you don't get Alzheimer's, because that's really creating a lot of free radicals and so forth. So in principle, as long as you have an anti-inflammatory diet and using things that keep that away, you'll live a long, healtty life. Yeah, including brain cancer.
For me, I assume it was an underlying assumption, but I just wanted to get it spelled.
So you do that, and then there's things that we can use for brain chemistry. For instance, it's been proven clinically, and it's kind of hard to prove this. With human beings are complex, and it's always hard to do food clinic work, but they do these sort of things from time to time. For instance, in China, Japan, Korea, etc., where they're drinking green tea, they discovered that that group that drinks green tea very, very often, they don't get Alzheimer's. I put my mother onto green tea. When I started this, I went back and lived with her for 6 months and cooked every day and got her, and she only did 4 things that were different. And she's now 95 and she's as smart as anything, right? Instead of the black tea, I got her into the green tea and the bancha 40 years ago. I got her onto using some miso. She loves the udon noodles, right? And she's an Anglo-Saxon cook. So she loves her lamb, and New Zealand has the best lamb, grass-fed, etc. And she's doing fine. So there's ways of doing this, you know. The point I was going to make, there are some things that are good for rejuvenating. There's the green tea you can get as an extract, the ECGC. The green tea extract is a supplement that's very, very good for brain chemistry. We use ginseng a lot. You can get ginseng as a tincture. You put it into the spring dragon tea, and that's very good for your brain and rejuvenating brain chemistry. And there's several others that you can use, even from Western herbalism. We've got some. We're just running out of time here.
I was going to say, it hasn't helped for decades, the low fat message. And that's been really unhelpful across generations of people. Even now you can see it's 0% fatty, and it's not good for the brain.
I mean, it's actually outrageous the way they pulled the wool over our head. For the last 60 years, basically they just needed to sell a lot of vegetable oils to it, and they had TV to do it, and they had some corrupt nutritionists on their side saying somehow they linked up saturated fats with heart disease, with no clinical evidence to this day, like silch. They pulled the wool over our heads for the last 60 years, and it's massive suffering. 1 in 3 in cancer. I mean, when you sit down and think about it, it's like, makes you angry. I mean, I'm not an angry person, but it's like, how did they get away? So we're only now, I've been pushing this for 40 years, and thank God other people are like going, you have to get back to it. We don't want our older people getting Alzheimer's, we want wise older people. We can be wise old people, where we can contribute. I want to finish this. I know we're getting late. A really, really good one, guys, for, you know how I've said, getting those fats back into your diet. Well, you won't get so many sugar cravings, for one thing. It's, and you'll get the taste back, but from time to time, if you've got sort of blood sugar fluctuations, right, sort of highs and lows, this is a very, very good supplement, berberine, cheap as anything, readily available over the internet. Take that every day if your blood sugar is really fluctuating. It's a good anti-aging supplement. Now, some people also play with metformin. You might know metformin, it's been around for 50 years, and people with diabetes use metformin. People in the anti-aging community, a lot of them dabble with metformin as well, because it actually, even though they don't have diabetes, it wipes out the excess insulin, which is a good thing to do, right? And you can get some interesting sort of longevity principles from that. So that's metformin. Metformin is the only drug that I've mentioned tonight. Some countries you probably have to get that prescribed. You can get it off certain internet, and then in America you can buy it off the shelf. They're a lot more free and easy with it. For instance, in America you can buy melatonin, which, okay. If you do go to anti-aging systems and you wanted a place to start, the Thymus Bioregulator. Get onto that one. What happens with this is you just generally take it for 10 or 20 days and then you stop for a month, and then you come back to it and then you stop. So the dosage is on there, follow the dosage. It's all safe, it's not like there's no side effects. It's like a supplement, yeah? But it's another little area that's very, very interesting. Okay, if you go to telestep.com, you'll get some good information there, good research there, and there is a webinar that I did with Inga, and there's Rex Hodge, the rocket scientist, the business partner, where we put all of this together. Good information there. Here's some other ones just to finish off with tonight. Melatonin, people take that for sleep problems, but it's been discovered that you can actually mega dose with melatonin. So if you have insomnia and you're only just taking like 5 milligrams or something, you can get it up to 30 or 40. They're even selling bottles now in America of 60 milligrams because they've discovered that it's completely safe, no side. Your body generates this anyway. It's a hormone regulator, and it's got some really, really interesting anti-cancer qualities to it as well. And somebody, I think earlier on, mentioned like the hormonal fluctuations. This is a really, really good one, even if you don't have sleeping problems, right? So you might just want to start off with 10 or 20 milligrams, right? And you can stop and start it. Just do it for 2 weeks, see how you feel. Stop it anyway. Don't keep taking, 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off. It's a good idea. Okay, I'll finish with one. This is an exotic one to finish with. Carbon 60, right? Carbon 60 is a buckyball. Does anybody know Buckmaster Fuller, the great American genius who did the geodesic dome? And anyway, it's an icosadodeca, which is a 60-sided golden-mean relationship. It's like a soccer ball, okay? So think of it this way, it's now a nanocarbon, right? And it's got that shape, it's got this 60 vortexes, which means that there's 60 points interacting with oxygen. So this is a major antioxidant, big time, right? Like usually you get one molecule interchanging one electron as an antioxidant, right? This has got 60, right? It's not expensive, you buy it as a tincture. I combine it at night with CBD oil, right? So I just mix 50-50, mix it up, shake it up, put it under the tongue, a couple of squirts, and I sleep with it. CBD is very good. We've got so many receptors for CBD. You know, for those who don't know, it's cannabis, medicinal cannabis, which without the THC, you know. But guys, if you really, really want to use CBD for pain relief and to really get the medicinal benefit, you need it with THC. You need it with the CBD and the THC. Because of political reasons, they regulate the THC because of its psychoactive properties. But when you're taking it as an oil, it's not smoking dope. It's just like, these people are so stupid, don't they get it? It's so medicinal when you combine the two. That's the real. So if you can get your hands on the real thing, I don't know if you can do that so in America now there's certain states that you can buy it, right? And then there's other states that you can't, right? And then, but anyway, just so you know, you can get it prescribed for pain with this THC. So anyway, if you can, the CBD you can just buy from anywhere now, yeah? You can get it, yeah.
It's THC cannabis oil.
Yeah, it is. And you put the carbon 60 with it, which is a major antioxidant, you know, which takes out the, we generate free radicals just, you know, walking around and talking, but, you know, we've often got a lot of free radical damage, and you need to clear that out of your body. So carbon 60 is really good for that, the major biohack there. So we can kind of leave it at that because we're running out of time. I have a summer retreat coming up, as you know. Here's our website, academyhealingnutrition.uk. Our program is starting in June, and it's online. There's 10 modules. You watch it on your tablet. There's all the mentoring and all of that. Remember, half of this curriculum is practical cooking. So it's not just all intellectual stuff and herbs and cooking and fats, but we show you how to make we show you what to eat for breakfast. And a lot of nutritionists don't do that. You know, you're kind of left with, you know, we kind of ground it now with, you know, how to make really good dishes and drinks and soups and broths and how to integrate the herbs. So we take you on a 1 year journey, because even on the most motivated person, it takes 1 year to change eating habits and get new ideas and try this and shop differently. It does take a year, so that's what we do. But we also have a more kind of like an intensive version of that at our summer retreat coming up here. And here's the Longevity Wellness Retreat.com website specifically for that retreat coming up in July. I've got all of my teachers coming, which is over 8 international teachers. And we're cooking with medicinal mushrooms, we're doing the elixirs, we're doing whole food cooking, salad dressings, we're doing biohacking, we've got the Therify device here, it's activating the longitudinal scalar waves, which is the way every cell in your body communicates with all the nutrients. We've got a cacao ceremony, if you go to the website, you'll get the whole information with that, and you can download the brochure and read about it. So that's what's coming up, and that's it for tonight.